Hey everybody, Gurmy's Coast Yard here, and in today's episode of Germanator Studios, we are doing a variety of things. This is sort of a behind the scenes episode in terms of what we're going to be doing in the park. So to start, and I mentioned this in the last episode, I had an idea that basically I didn't like the sight line from the train, um, and how you could see that green building there, which is the behind the scenes for our log ride. So I had the idea, well, why not continue that rock wall a little bit further and then make the roadway have a tunnel through it? So that's what I'm doing here. One technique I want to point out that I'm doing right now on camera, and this is the first time I've ever done this, is if you want to make a railroad crossing with a path, and the reason I have that path there is to make that tunnel. But if you want to make a railroad crossing with a path, or make train tracks cross a path without, getting an issue with the intersections, if you sink the terrain down below the path, and you can rewind to watch this again, if you sink the terrain down enough to place path on the terrain but have the train tracks going sort of over it, and I don't really know how to explain it verbally, um, but you can bring that terrain tile back up with the pathway on it to the height of the train tracks. And that's sort of a way of getting around the collision restriction, I guess, if that's what you want to refer to it as. And this is the first time I've ever done that. It's something I've been keeping in the back of my mind for a long time, maybe a year or two. But I've been aware of that bug as a way to do that. So I finally got to do it here. Unfortunately, it's not a path within the park itself. Um, I did initially want to have the train sort of run through somewhere through the western town and have a crossing in there, but ultimately it just didn't work out, and that's no big deal. I'm sure there will be an opportunity at some point to have some train crossings within the park itself. But anyway, um, we did find a use for it. And moving on, now that I can talk about what's actually on screen, um, this tunnel, I went back and forth with it. I think this video clip at the original speed was like 35 minutes long. That's not all the time I spent on this tunnel, but I spent probably 10 minutes just refining this tunnel because I'm using the sort of terrain tiles, is what I call them, the scenery piece, um, to add additional height to this tunnel so that way we can have vehicles fit through. And as I was placing those and then adjusting the height of the terrain above as necessary, and this became an issue especially when trying to adjust the sight line to completely mask the show building, um, where I would adjust the terrain and then the height of those tiles would change, because adjusting the height of terrain tends to mess with scenery that's above it, or in this case, below it. So in here you can see where I'm going to edit that, and you'll see where the tiles kind of give me a headache. I get through the first two uh, terrain units, we'll call them for the sake of differentiation, um, without any issue. And then when we get to these ones over the tunnel, you can see where it messes up those little terrain tiles. So that was a little bit frustrating. Um, but like I said, I went back and forth with this for quite a little bit of time just to get it just right. And in the end, I think it worked out moderately well. Um, and as you can see, I was able to bring that terrain up all along there just to maximize the amount of, what do you call it? The amount of things that we hide. I don't know how to explain it. There were some monorails and stuff in the distance. So, yeah, I would say it worked out pretty well. Anyway, of course, along here, we're just putting in that rock wall. And on the back side, because this is not really visible to guests, I decided to just use the concrete tunnel entrance, and that worked just fine. Anyhow, what are we doing now? More of the same. Oh yeah, so along here, for reasons I can't remember because I recorded this footage a couple days ago, um, I just redid that railroad crossing. I think it was just to have it further back from that tunnel or something. Oh, I know. It's because I couldn't have it there with that concrete entrance. So I had to move it back one piece. And then along here, I decided to put some more lines along the roadway just because this is sort of a weird area with some blind spots. I decided to have designated lanes for vehicles, even though this is more or less behind the scenes. And when I say more or less, I mean more. And when I say more, I mean all the way. I mean, there is not going to be any guest traffic along here. This is all going to be just park vehicles and stuff. Um, but anyway, I put those road lines in there emphasize that, um, just to emphasize that those were designated lanes. But I won't go any further with that. One thing I will mention though, obviously we're kind of late now to talk about it, but I wanted to point out the diagonal road lines. I ended up using a brick wall, the diagonal brick wall, to do that, and that was not sort of my first idea. Um, However, there are very few diagonal walls in RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, and my options were that one or the diagonal stone wall that we used for the railroad crossings. And I decided I'd go with the red color just because it stands out a bit more. But if I had it my way, I would definitely use something um, yellow colored just to differentiate those lanes. But nevertheless, it is what it is. And now I'm working on another building. So I had mentioned in the last episode that this area I sort of wanted to use for things like planning and design buildings and stuff. Um, like office space is really what it is, but I decided to continue with that theme in this episode, and this is not the first of those such buildings we will create. And really, at the end of the day, what the purpose of these buildings can be left to the imagination because I didn't put any signage or anything on the outside. Maybe down the line, once we have all the buildings sort of complete, I'll go through and try and do that just to give every building some sort of purpose. But as it stands, I didn't feel any great need to differentiate one building from another. Um, these are buildings are really just filler, is what they are. Just things to fill in the empty space and to give purpose to those areas behind the scenes. Um, and man, I keep rambling on and forgetting to talk about things that are on screen. So I did do an interior to this building. Just a couple office rooms and then a conference space. That was the one with all the windows. Or maybe that could be like a lunchroom or something. And then we have the bigger garage area for storage or what have you. And then along here, finally talking about what's on screen, just putting in some parking spaces. So I figure probably quite a few people between the railroad employees and the people working in these little office slash warehouse spaces. These people, and there's probably quite a few. So I wanted to have some parking for them. And then, of course, right along here, just a couple uh, accessible parking spots to make sure everyone can make it into work. And for some reason, those walls were off right there, as you could see, so I just adjusted them to make them flush with the rest of the building. And then I wanted to add a no parking lane right along here because I figured if maintenance work is being done on trains or if they're being added and removed to the track, we would want some space right along there for a crane to be hauled in, just a small sort of crane or something along those lines. Um, so that's what I did there, is I just added a no parking lane. And then, of course, going in and adding a little car scenery thing. Now we're in real time. Um, I guess I don't really need to do this in real time since I did it in the last episode. But I figure this is for the adding the train transfer tracks and everything. It's useful to be able to see how I do it. So obviously, I'm going to explain it for the 100th time, but if you just create a ghost piece, or what I like to call a ghost piece, and then save and exit the game, that ghost piece will turn into a scenery version of the track. And that can be deleted later on, but it will always respawn when you restart the game. So if you delete them and build tracks the actual track where you want it to be, then when you respawn, you'll have two pieces of track intersecting, and with a little work, you could create an entire roller coaster if you wanted out of those ghost pieces that become scenery items. But that would be absolutely pointless, and you never should, because you'll never be able to fully delete that roller coaster, and it'll never function. Anyhow, moving along, and speaking of the railroad, so we're not quite done working on that. I realized right along here there are quite a lot of sort of interchanges, I think might be the word, but uh, switch tracks where the train can move from one track to another. And it sort of, I sort of realized that it would be useful to have a signal box where those tracks could all be changed from one point. And the way I tried to build this um, was I wanted it to sort of have a view of the entire train layout. Obviously, it's located right next to this section of track, but eventually the train will run all the way down the length of the park to what will become our zoo eventually. And so I built it up on a platform, partially for that reason, but partially because I did some research, and it seems as if most signal boxes are elevated anyway, or were when they were popular in use with the railroad. Um, of course, now things are a lot more centralized and digital. Um, but anyway, so we had built this signal box, and it has a view. I deleted some of those trees and add bigger windows here. That way it can sort of see all the way down the length of the track from that spot, and they can see if the different blocks are clear. Um, so it's a small detail, but something I wanted to include. Um, so yeah, it was just an idea I had, and I think it works decently well enough. I don't even know if like in this setting it would even be used full time. I feel like if a park wasn't necessarily crowded, they may only run one train. I know sometimes Cedar Point only runs one train, but more often than not, they run two. Um, anyway, it may be that we're only running one train and this doesn't really need used, but it's just a central location to have a visual on the entire track and to manage those switch tracks. I figured it would be a useful thing to add. So after a little bit of refinement, I got that all figured out. And one detail I should have pointed out a little bit ago was I sort of added like a controlled desk slash panel using the one of the Chicago wall pieces. I think the 1/3 height Chicago wall has that look, and we also use that in our Dinosaur Dark Ride as sort of this weird electromechanical type thing. I don't really know what the purpose was, but we use it as part of like the little warp tunnels. And I decided to use it again there because it looks like the right size and shape that it could be a desk of some sort or like a control panel. And I think it did a great job at that. Looking through that window at sort of that bird's eye distance, I think it accomplished what I wanted it to. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But moving along from all that, the area around our wooden roller coaster was looking kind of barren. So I decided to put trees and a lot of these green spaces, a lot of the smaller green spaces, or a lot of the infields, if you want to call them that. Um, One thing I included here, just for one reason or another, I decided to have a little um, side lane on this road where like cars could pull off. And my idea here was maybe maintenance vehicles would want to pull off right here for people who are going to be doing maintenance on the wooden roller coaster or something along those lines. And so to sort of fit that idea, I decided to delete some of these trees and make a little gravelly looking path back into the wooden coaster's helix with the idea that maybe that's like a little access path for maintenance people to get to the ride or something. Um, I mean, just sort of a loose idea. Just something to justify having that little side path or side lane there, but I guess it's up for interpretation. Anyhow, moving along with more things that are behind the scenes, I decided to work on this area behind the wooden coaster. I knew I kind of wanted to have like a staff parking area back here, but the, as I built this out, I realized that this is probably a good space for more warehouse slash office space, and so along the back here, I built a large garage, and I think, this whole complex is most inspired by the planning and design complex at Cedar Point. Um, so I built sort of like a garage. This is sort of inspired by like the big um, carpenter garage or whatever there. Um, and again, in case you haven't been watching the series, if you're wondering how I know what a lot of that looks like, it's because I did quite a few building inspections at Cedar Point and for an internship, and got to see a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Um, and luckily, because this is Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 and my designing is only loosely inspired, I don't think I'm forbidden from showing you what's on screen, because really it's not the same at all. So this would be a very crude representation, and it's not like I'm building any of the super secret things that can be seen behind the scenes. Not that I really saw anything super secret to begin with. But anyway, um, so that barn was sort of, or that shed, garage, whatever you want to call it, was loosely inspired by the one of the carpenter sheds at Cedar Point, or garages, I should say. Nevertheless, um, now I'm just building a little access road. I realized that we have a good spot right along there to have an access point from the main road for the resort, um, to get to this little area and to get to the access road um, on the back side of the park. So sort of that perimeter access road. So that's what I decided to do. And then along here, we're just building up another long building. Um, yeah. Oh boy. Here we are again. I was going so strong, and now I feel like I've run out of things to talk about. Um, but yeah, this building is, I mean, again, it's just sort of office and storage space. We start with a garage on that left side, but as I build this out, I realized that I didn't really like having that garage. Just the size of that garage door seemed awfully big for such a small building. It only goes 3 tiles back, and along here, I realized I had enough room to sort of build 4 tiles back. So I do that and made that the big sort of storage space for this building slash complex. And this is eventually where the big garage door will go, and the other one will just sort of be um, whatever it is. So yeah, it's kind of hard coming up with like a story for some of these projects, um, when there's sort of when they're sort of bland. And I apologize if this is sort of a bland part of the project. I promise it'll get better down the line, but maybe not in today's episode. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna make a promise now. I have not done this yet, but I'm gonna film a POV of the wooden coaster, since the landscape around it has changed quite a bit. So if you stick around, it'll be a little more worth the wait. Um, anyhow, so yeah, here's where I'm putting that new big garage door in. And of course, we included a smaller garage door off to the side just to differentiate things a bit. And right now, this building's just a big block, so I decided to add some windows along the top just to get some natural lighting in there for the workers. And I was trying to come up with a way to put those windows in without sort of having them like right over the garage door, just to make things, I don't know how to explain it. It just felt a little unbalanced having that window right on top of the door. So I decided to move the garage door over 1 tile. And finally, what we're going to be doing for the rest of this episode, to the best of my memory, is putting in trees, and lots of trees. So I wanted to add as much of a border between the wooden coaster and that building as I could. Even though we used our favorite go away green color, I decided that I just wanted something a little bit more, because go away green is sort of ineffective when that's the only color that's visible. So a building painted that color smack in the middle of your vision, you're still going to be able to see it. So adding these trees was just a way to add that sort of natural barrier. and sort of eliminate the building from view. But I've not ridden the wooden coaster in game since building all this, so we will find out together how effective that all is. But anyway, normally when I build with random or sort of quote unquote random trees and stuff, I try to use like a checkerboard pattern. In this case, it would be a checkerboard of the large sugar pines and the medium sugar pines. Um, but there were some spots, especially right along that border, where I decided to just only use large ones, just to make sure that they were tall enough for the ride, because it's sort of elevated in that area. The track is, and then in the other areas where I could get away with it, I just used that sort of checkerboard between the two different heights. And we really just filled in all this empty space where nothing more practical could go. And I think that ultimately serves the ride area pretty well. So, yeah, along there, just more trees. Um, and yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's just going to be another minute or so of this. Um, but yeah. And you'll notice too, like in some spots, I'm just going diagonal with the trees, and I'm not going, you know, going ham on the trees, especially along like the border areas of the ride. Um, and then, of course, along here, I don't think the trees were completely necessary where the lift hill was, but I figured this will sort of just help establish the environment that the ride's in for people who are on the ride. Sort of help establish the fact that maybe it, like, not maybe, but that it is supposed to be within a forest. So that is why I decided to put trees basically everywhere I could within reason. Granted, the western town itself does not have a whole lot of foliage. There's a lot more dead foliage, but I figured along the border we could include a more lively forest. But that's going to do it for this episode. I'm going to leave you with a POV. I will see you guys in the next one. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. A good bye.